You know, you see many films, there's a great confusion, especially in my particular realm of work. There's a great confusion between the words mystery and suspense. And the two things are absolutely miles apart. You see, mystery is an intellectual process, like in a whodunit. But suspense is essentially an emotional process. Therefore, you can only get the suspense element going by giving the audience information. I dare say you've seen many films which have mysterious goings on. You don't know what's going, why the man is doing this, why that, and you're about a third of the way through the film before you realize what it's all about. And to me, that's completely wasted footage, because there's no emotion. No. Not basically to say this is a mystery, because I've found that it's like a whodunit. I've only made one whodunit many years ago.
Welcome back to Elster's Rifles and Reloading. Now before we lube, size, and put this brass in its second and final wash, there's a couple things I need to get out of the way. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you. I finally hit 100 plus subscribers, and my next goal is to hit 1,000. And with your continued support of subscribing, liking, and sharing my videos, I can continue to make these videos for you. Now, if it feels like I'm beating the topic of headspace into your brain, it's because I am. If you're new to the game and you haven't seen part 5 before you see this part 6, you need to seriously stop, rewind, and go back. Now, I was just limited in time in part 5, and there's something I really need to go over in terms of headspace and using bump gauges. And before we can actually size this Lake City brass that wasn't fired out of my rifle, we need to concentrate on this piece of brass that was. Okay, so now that you've watched part 5 and all other previous episodes that got us up to this point in the reloading journey, there's two things I really need to go over. Now, if you were to go out and purchase the exact same brand of calipers, bump gauges, and anvil, and I was to give you this piece of brass and you put it in your setup, that doesn't mean that it's going to come up exactly 1.455 inches. It's going to be really close, but it's not going to be identical. The name of the game here is just using your bump gauge to make sure, an example, a semi-auto rifle, that you bump the brass back 0.003 inches, or in a bolt action, you bump it back 0.001. Now, like I said before, the amount that you bump your headspace back is up to you. And the reason why I like using this method and not Wilson case gauges is you know exactly what you're bumping your brass back. Excessive bumping of the brass during the sizing process can lead to numerous things. It can shorten the longevity of the brass itself, or even worse, case head separation. Now, when you size the brass expands. The brass has got to go somewhere. So when you bump the shoulder back, the brass will typically expand in length. If you don't bump the brass back, the headspace will actually grow. And you'll learn this over a period of time of reloading. Now, when bumping back the brass will expand and the walls of the brass will become thinner. And that's why you got to be concerned about case head separation. And you can check for case head separation by bending the end of a paper clip and scraping the inside of the brass. It's typically going to be in this area. If you feel any shallowness or indentation in the brass back here, trash it. I'm usually concerned about case head separation, usually around the 5th, 6th rounds of fire on that brass. But the amount that you check it and your procedures of checking case head separation is 100% up to you. Now on the flip side of the coin, if you don't bump the brass back at all, the headspace is going to be the same or even worse. You'll notice this when you're reloading. The headspace can actually grow. And if you try to load that ammunition into your rifle, it's going to get stuck in your chamber. And if you try to load this in one of my ARs without a bumped headspace, you might have to mortar the rifle by slamming the buttstock of the rifle onto the bench while pulling on the charging handle just to get it out of the chamber. And it's not good. Okay, enough on headspace. I think you get my drift. It's way important. Let's get this stuff lubed. Now, the obvious reason why we lube the brass is to make sure the brass doesn't get stuck in the die. If you don't lube the brass, you're going to eventually learn how to use one of these. And that's a stuck case removal tool. And it's not fun, trust me. Now, there's numerous ways of lubing your brass. Now, this is just what I do. Not only do I use Hornady one-shot case lube, but this stuff is the bomb. If you don't have Imperial wax, you need to go out and buy it right now. Now what I like to do is just get a little dab of wax on the tip of my finger, put it in the palm of my hand, quick spray it down with some case lube, spray the brass, and just work the brass with your hand. Now don't overdo this. You can put too much lube on the brass. If you put too much lube on the brass, you're going to start to see little pockets forming around the head of the brass itself, or even on the body, and it can happen. So this isn't your happy place. Don't use too much lube. That's it. And I like to hit mine with an air hose when I'm done. Now, if I was forced to pick a sentence of words that sums up not only just reloading, but also shooting your actual rifles, that would be consistent in everything you do. Now, I'm not going to go through every detail on how to set up your dies, how to use your press. Obviously, everyone has different presses, dies, you name it. So make sure you read those directions that come with your dies, obviously your press, before you do anything. And then read it again. Let's start out with this 5.56 Lake City brass. Now before we size this brass, I can't stress this enough. Make sure your sizing dies are 100% clean. After each use, make sure you clean them. I personally like to use brake cleaner for general cleaning. Make sure it's non-chlorinated. And then to finish off the cleaning and for storage, I like to use Hornady one-shot dry lube. So a quick overview, zero out calipers. This is the brass ejected out of my rifle. 80% of it I would say is 1.456. We need to take this Lake City brass down to 1.453, and that's a long ways to go. Now everyone has their own way of doing things. This is just what I do. Like I said before, consistent reloading produces consistent ammunition. Let's get this die that I already have set up back to square one. Now what I like to do is make sure that the decapping pin sticks out roughly 3/16 of an inch if you're not using the decapping die. Now remember, we've already decapped this, so it's not so important. But if you don't have a decapping die, you need to do this process. Now I have a Hornady lock and load progressive press, so I use these bushings. If you have a different press, it's going to be completely different, so take this with a grain of salt. Let's get this in my press. Now I'm not going to take you through the steps of setting up your press and your die. That's what your directions are for. Read them. My only concern is getting a consistent headspace bump. Now it comes to new reloaders. This is 100% the most frustrating part of the reloading process. Tap this brass in step 1, cratered primers. They don't always happen, but when they do, they can give you inconsistent headspace bumps and inaccurate readings on your calipers. Now remember, we need to bump this Lake City brass from 462 past my ejected brass out of my AR of 456 all the way down to 453. That's it. Now with this particular press, the Hornady Lock and Load Progressive Press, I have found that you have two options when getting a consistent headspace bump. Running your ram consistently is the key to getting a consistent headspace bump. You have one option of overscrewing your die and slightly over camming the ram, or not being so aggressive of screwing down the die and pressing down on the handle as hard as possible. What I like to do, and this is personally what I do, and you need to figure this out, especially if you have a different press, is I like to slightly over cam my press a little bit. First things first, you need to lube the inside of the neck, and I would say approximately every 20th piece of brass. Now on the first piece of brass, I'll put the very smallest amount of wax on the very first piece. You don't have to do it on them all. I just do it on the first one. And when I say small, it's minuscule. Now remember, this brass was .462. Let's see what happens. Nothing. But look, it actually grew. And that can happen when you don't bump the shoulder. Okay, so let's turn this die down just a little bit more. Let's see what we came up with. Now it's starting to move. Keep on going. Turn down the die just a little bit more. Now remember, we're moving this shoulder a long ways. This isn't brass ejected out of your rifle. Generous headspace. We're at 457. Keep on going. Turn the die a little bit. Now we're really starting to overcam just a little bit. So close. All right, it's not going to take much from this point. You're done. Now once I have that, what I like to do is raise the ram and lock it down. Set it and forget it. So one final note here on getting the correct headspace on your brass. If you're a complete perfectionist and you can get 453 in every single one, you're kidding yourself. You're going to be off a little bit here and there. It could be below, it could be a little bit above, but your main objective in this scenario was 453, and I think we've accomplished that. Now I'm not going to go through all this 7.62 with you. In essence, it's the same thing. But let me just run one piece. Don't forget to lube your brass in 0 calipers. Now remember, the 7.62 brass I purchased online came to my front doorstep at 632. Brass ejected out of my Rock River 308 rifle, or 7.62, whatever you want to call it, comes out at 627. We need to take that down to 624. Okay, so we're running out of time, so let me speed things up for you. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, holy smokes, this is a lot of work to get to this point. And trust me, when you get a method to your madness down, you're gonna fly right through it. So all you need to do now is get this brass back in the wash. Go back to step 2. I'm not gonna go through all that information. Literally, the only difference is adding a teaspoon of Lemmy Shine, still using the Dawn, clean with hot water, and rinse with cold. That's it. And keep an eye out for part 7, where we'll take this brass through its final stages of brass prep. And you're gonna find out, as much as I did, that brass prep sucks. In order for me to continue these videos, please subscribe, like, and share. I'll see you next time.